What's good? It's Woog. I don't have a formal breakdown prepared for Oscar Duarte versus Kenneth Sims Jr. or Regis Prograis versus Jojo Diaz, but I wanted to give you my quick thoughts on the two most relevant fights taking place this weekend. The headliner is Oscar Duarte versus Kenneth Sims Jr. and Oscar Duarte's a slight favorite here. He's got the momentum, he's got the name going in. He gave Ryan Garcia some difficult rounds and was arguably winning the fight at the time Ryan Garcia caught him in the later rounds and stopped him. I did think Oscar Duarte did that thing where you wait till 9 to get up and then you shoot up, but Oscar Duarte got blasted there and he got hit with the combination after he got hit badly with that first punch. That was the beginning of the end of Garcia versus Duarte. Garcia also missed weight in that fight, that should be noted, but this is actually a pretty close fight odds wise. Kenneth Sims Jr. is about to have his biggest opportunity. He's been a name that's been represented by, major promoter for most of his career, and he's kind of been on the cusp of not being a breakout star, but getting relevant enough fights to where you're in the mix, like really in that championship mix, in that meaningfully big fight mix. His biggest wins come against Elvis Rodriguez and Batir Akhmedov. He does have a couple losses. Those losses came a while ago though. Those were 2017 and 2018. So Kenneth Sims Jr. is a good fighter. We don't know what his ceiling is. He's a good boxer, not a lot of power. He switches. He's not going in there for the kill, but he's looking to sharpshoot you a bit. Oscar Duarte can really thump, and he's a pretty good boxer. And he just became, the first fighter to stop Jojo Diaz. Like a few people had beaten Jojo Diaz, including William Zepeda. Jojo Diaz's first fight or first loss was against Gary Russell Jr., prime Gary Russell Jr. We're about to get into Regis Prograis versus Jojo Diaz. But Oscar Duarte could really thump. He beat Miguel Madueño. That was his last fight. But although he's the bigger name between these two, this really is, for those that have been watching both fighters over the past several years, like if this fight was made 2 years ago, Kenneth Sims would probably be the favorite. But Oscar Duarte, because of his profile being raised against Ryan Garcia and then having those meaningful or those good wins against Jojo Diaz, Batir Akhmedov, both of these guys, by the way, have beaten Akhmedov. Akhmedov had a hot start to his career, but lost to Mario Barrios first and then had a few losses after that. So he had a pretty short shelf life in terms of being a viable name. But yeah, Oscar Duarte is pretty good, and the way I see this one going down, I think Kenneth Sims is going to have some success early. He's going to be out sweet sciencing, for lack of a better phrase, Oscar Duarte. He's going to be getting his nice counter shots in. He's going to look like he's a step ahead. Oscar Duarte is going to look like he's a tad slow compared to Sims. But I think that the second half of the fight is going to be very meaningful. This is a 12-rounder. So unless Kenneth Sims could get enough of Duarte's respect where he starts halting some of the pursuit, 12 rounds is a long time to have to keep somebody off of you who's determined to keep coming forward and, throwing big punches. Duarte's not, he's not somebody who just rushes in, but he is looking to get inside and let his hands go. I don't see Kenneth Sims standing his ground to the point where he's winning those middle to late rounds. Maybe he does, and if he does, then his profile is going to shoot if he can get the better of Oscar Duarte. But I think that in a close fight, the hotter fighter, name-wise and reputation profile-wise, is going to get the nod here. This fight is taking place in Chicago, Illinois. I think that, look, again, I like that this fight was made up because often you get somebody who's going to be like a minus 500 type of favorite. That's not the case here. Kenneth Sims has a real shot at winning this one. And if he does, he's been champing at the bit for a while to, again, explode his name. This is his chance. This is kind of like the do or die here. Like, I don't know how long that road is back to a position like this if this doesn't work out for Kenneth Sims. So I think he's going to bring his best. These guys are about the same age. On paper, Kenneth Sims is an inch taller, but Duarte's got the reach advantage by a couple of inches, like 71 to 69. So I think that Kenneth Sims is going to have success in the first half of the fight, but I think that Duarte is going to come on strong. I actually see Oscar Duarte maybe getting a knockdown. I think it's going to get kind of rough towards the end of the fight. I'm talking not like 11-12, but I'm saying 8 through 10. I think it's going to get pretty rocky for Kenneth Sims, maybe even a knockdown, but definitely one of those optics where it looks like, oh, it looks like Kenneth Sims is starting to show his wear, and he's becoming easier to touch, easier to reach. We see that often where the super sweet science guy is doing well for the first few rounds, and then once round 5 or 6 hit, all of a sudden those legs aren't moving the same. He's not circling out as quickly as he was. His head movement and his dipping at the torso isn't as sharp, and then they start getting caught more often. Think Roman Villa catching up to Rashidi Ellis, ended up being a close fight, or when Caleb Plant was having early round success against David Benavidez. It's hard to maintain that super sharp defense throughout the duration of a 12 rounder. But in this case, I think it's going to stay close. I think the pendulum is going to swing somewhere around 5 or 6. I think Oscar Duarte is going to be awarded a close, I'm talking maybe even split, but a close decision win over Kenneth Sims Jr. Maybe even controversial. You know, another thing I want to make quick mention of is Oscar Duarte's fight against Alex Martin. This was 2 fights before he fought Ryan Garcia. Alex Martin, who's not as good a boxer as Kenneth Sims, but is pretty good, was actually doing pretty well against Oscar Duarte, you know, just outboxing him. He got knocked out in the 8th round of a 10-round fight, but he was doing well up until that point. Not that it started to look like Oscar Duarte had a puncher's chance or necessarily needed a knockout. I have to look at what the score was at the time of the stoppage. It looks like, yeah, things really fell apart for Martin towards the end, but the scorecards, well, at least one of the scorecards was close. 2 of them had, you know, Duarte up kind of considerably, but there were 2 knockdowns in the 8th round just as the fight was about to be stopped. But I was saying that to say that Alex Martin in the early rounds did have some success against Duarte. I'm going to consider that here because, again, Alex Martin isn't as good as Sims. He's lost several times since that knockout loss to Duarte. And I think there's a good chance that Sims can do the things that Alex Martin was doing well, but even better. So something to keep an eye out for. And another thing to look at is the weights here. Oscar Duarte, to me, is kind of a big 140. Wouldn't be totally surprised if he doesn't make weight. But yeah, I've got Duarte winning a close decision. Now let's get into Regis Prograis, his comeback fight after, you know, a couple losses against Devin Haney, a bad loss against Devin Haney. Devin Haney won almost every round in his 140-pound debut, challenging for the 140-pound WBC belt that Prograis had won in a vacant title fight by stopping Jose Zepeda. Remember, Prograis won the title his second time, becoming a 140-pound champ. Then he won a close, kind of disputed decision where he, you know, they didn't rule it a knockdown, but they should have, and Prograis acknowledged that against Danielito Zorrilla. Prograis winning that fight against Zorrilla planted in a lot of people's minds that maybe Prograis is slowing down a bit. And again, he was awarded that decision and then got clearly outboxed and dropped by Devin Haney, lost the decision there. And then he lost to Jack Catterall, got dropped twice after having some good success in the early rounds against Catterall. So this isn't the same Regis Prograis who fought Josh Taylor in that title unification fight in the World Boxing Super Series. No, Prograis, who's a shorter fighter, 5'8" with a 67-inch reach, is now 36 years old, and he's still fighting at 140, including in this upcoming fight. Like, Prograis has been at 140 for pretty much the whole relevant part of his career. I don't know how he's been able to stay at the same division through his late 20s, early 30s, now into mid 40s, still gonna do it. But he's gonna be fighting Jojo Diaz. And Jojo Diaz, I didn't believe in Jojo Diaz at 135. At his best, he was 126. He was undefeated when he fought Gary Russell Jr. That was his first loss, got outboxed. I mean, Gary Russell Jr. had the fastest hands in the game. Like, in my view, he's got some of the fastest hands I've ever seen, and he displayed those against Jojo Diaz, who was a pretty hot prospect for a minute. Then he goes to 130, beats Tevin Farmer for a share of the 130-pound title, takes Tevin Farmer's belt, and then loses it on the scale before fighting Shavkat Rakhimov, who I actually met at that Terrence Crawford versus Madrimov fight, and, you know, chopped it up with him, took a picture, and he was really cool. He was almost like surprised that I recognized him. He's like, me? I'm like, yeah, what up, Shavkat Rakhimov? But Rakhimov fought Jojo Diaz to a draw, so nobody came away with the title there, and then Rakhimov started losing fights after that, way post-prime. He's been, beaten multiple times now, like pretty badly after that. But that was kind of, to me, the beginning of the end of Jojo Diaz, because he then goes to 135. He fights Javier Fortuna, who himself was a much smaller fighter in his prime. So you basically had like two featherweights fighting at like 135. And then Jojo Diaz fights Devin Haney, gets outboxed. Then he gets beaten up pretty badly against William Zepeda. Then he loses to Mercito Hesta. He gets gifted a decision against Jerry Perez. Then he loses to Jesus Perez Campos. And then he gets stopped against Oscar Duarte, beaten by Abraham Montoya, and then he wins a lower level fight. So I know Jojo Diaz has kind of been on this, I'm now reformed, I've left my demons behind me, I'm fighting as a way to kind of heal, and this is my therapy, boxing is my therapy. But the physical aspect is still the physical aspect. Yes, he did treat his body, poorly in terms of, his addictions and so forth. But he's also like in his mid 30s, and he's a little dude. Well, he's not even in his mid 30s. He's still only 32, but I feel like his fighting ability is aging much quicker because of his lifestyle and because he's a smaller guy, again, at his best at 126, who's now fighting not even at 135, which he didn't have power at 135. He was a smaller guy in like all of his fights at 135. Now he's at 140, fighting a career 140 guy who, yes, he's post-prime, but can still thump in Regis Prograis. So I'm looking at Jojo Diaz's career like, yo, are you just fighting to fight now? Like, what's the strategy? Because you're not gonna have success like that at 140. Now, can he beat Regis Prograis? I think that he's actually, you could argue that he's a better sweet science technical boxer than Prograis. Not guaranteed, but you could argue that. Prograis at his best had fast hands, he's a lefty, and he could crack. But Prograis had like he had a twitchiness where he could kind of be like this, not technically defending yourself in the traditional way, not displaying your offense in a traditional way, but being a good enough athletic puncher and a good enough twitchy athlete to be able to lord that over your opponents. That's how Regis Prograis beat Kirill Relic in one of his best career wins before getting in that really good fight against Josh Taylor, which was Prograis' first loss and only loss for a while until he lost to Devin Haney and then Jack Catterall years later. So look, I actually think Jojo Diaz is gonna look like a pretty good boxer in the first couple of rounds. I just don't, look, if Prograis even fights to a draw with Diaz, like not only if he loses, but if he fights to like a draw, that is bad news. Bad news for Prograis, for Rougarou's career. I think he's gonna beat Jojo Diaz, and I actually think that I was gonna pick Prograis via decision, but I actually think he's gonna get a stoppage here because, well, Jojo Diaz is let me change that. Jojo Diaz is a pretty damn good survivor. He's got a pretty good IQ. He's got a lot of savvy, a lot of experience. I don't think Regis Prograis, who was supposed to be fighting Oscar Duarte before, I think Prograis had to pull out of the fight, and then they entered Medueno to take Prograis' place to fight Duarte. I would have been curious to see Duarte versus Prograis, even though that could have been for Prograis if he's really past it. But Duarte comes at you, Jack Catterall moves away from you, Devin Haney stands his ground, but he's not coming at you, giving you those opportunities to hit him. Duarte does. So I actually thought that Prograis had a decent shot against, I thought Prograis had a decent shot against Duarte, but against Diaz, who at his best was slicker than Duarte, I think that Diaz will be found. I think Prograis will be able to get to him. I think that the second half of the fight, though, is going to be a little bit more, it's going to be at a simmering, more pedestrian pace. I think that Prograis is going to win enough rounds in the first 2/3 of the fight, and that he's still going to be winning most of the rounds in the second half of the fight. This is only a 10 rounder, not a 12 like Duarte versus Sims. But I think Prograis is going to win something like a 6 rounds to 4, 7 rounds to 3 fight, because Prograis doesn't have great endurance, and to beat Diaz historically, you have to throw a lot of punches. Mercito Hesta, William Zepeda, Gary Russell Jr. These guys really kind of empty the clip, so to speak. Prograis manages his energy. He's not a high volume guy. Like at his best, he threw good punches, but never like a ton of punches, even though he threw a lot in that fight against Josh Taylor. He really threw a lot, but I don't see him throwing that many punches anymore. So I think he's going to win a decision, but it's not going to be a dominant decision. I think it's going to be like 6 rounds to 4, 7 rounds to 3, maybe even a majority decision win. Again, I think Diaz will have some success here, but I'm going Prograis via decision. Prograis better win this fight, seriously, or else it's like over. So I'm going to pick Prograis to win via decision over Diaz. Will he get a knockdown? I don't know. I mean, look, if he stops Diaz, that would be good for Prograis because Diaz is still a name. Even in this faded part of his career, he's still a name. And Prograis needs a meaningful win here. I don't think he's going to get the stoppage. Again, I don't think he could put his foot on the gas in the second half of the fight, but he's got to still have enough to win a decision. Again, it'll be interesting to see who out tit for tats the other. Again, I think JoJo at his best, he would have never beaten Prograis, but you could argue that he could kind of out tit for tat him before he gets blasted by Prograis. But Diaz has a good chin, he's resilient, all of that. So he's going to stick around. I think Prograis is going to win something like 6 rounds to 4 here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.